After narrowly escaping the legal fallout from 3 consecutive false police reports, John began to feel like a man walking through a minefield, blindfolded. Each step could trigger the next crisis. While he hadn't yet been arrested, he and his attorney both recognized that the calls were no longer random outbursts. They were deliberate tactics, part of a broader, more calculated attempt to engineer his removal from the family home. The intent was painfully clear: get John out of the house through a court-ordered removal under the guise of domestic violence, while keeping him financially shackled to property. He would be cast as the aggressor and still expected to pay the mortgage, taxes, and utility bills. It was a win-win for Angela and a legal and emotional trap for John. The home, built in the early 1990s, came equipped with a basic alarm system that was no longer cutting edge. What it lacked, however, was video surveillance, and that posed a risk. Without proof of his conduct, it would be Angela's word against his, and John had already learned how dangerously persuasive her words could be. During consultation, John's attorney offered a straightforward recommendation: protect yourself, install cameras in common areas, make sure you have documentation of your whereabouts in the home. So John did just that. First, John contacted a home security professional, someone he knew through the neighborhood's Executive Homeowners Association. They'd had casual conversations at community events, and John hoped to get the installation done quickly and discreetly. But scheduling proved difficult. The longer it took, the more anxious he became. Every day without surveillance felt like borrowed time. Out of caution and urgency, John pivoted. He was referred to a small but well-known surveillance and counter-espionage store in a nearby city. The store, often used by private investigators and security-conscious professionals, sold compact, discreet recording equipment that could be installed without structural alterations to the home. John purchased 3 mini HD cameras, a DVR recorder with loop storage, a portable monitor for playback. He didn't tell anyone, not even close friends or relatives. He couldn't afford to. This was not espionage. This was insurance. He installed the cameras himself, each placed with precision and discretion. Camera 1, tucked beneath an end table in the formal living room, with a clear view of the breakfast nook, the exact spot where John had been seated during all 3 of Angela's prior police reports. Camera 2, mounted under a kitchen cabinet, angled across the open-concept family room, where John typically spent evenings with the kids, watching television or playing games. Camera 3, hidden discreetly in the sunroom-turned office, where tensions often flared during financial discussions and custody arguments. John felt a wave of calm he hadn't experienced in months. The cameras were silent witnesses, incapable of bias, capturing only the truth. And in a house where the truth was constantly manipulated, that meant everything. Weeks passed uneventfully. The cameras remained unnoticed, and John's life regained a degree of normalcy. But peace is a fragile thing in a narcissistic household. One evening, Angela discovered the kitchen camera, most likely while reaching for a dish or reorganizing a cabinet. Her reaction was explosive. She didn't confront John directly. Instead, she called a neighbor, a woman John had once considered a neutral party, but who had slowly been drawn into Angela's web of half-truths and whispered lies. Angela had been grooming this neighbor for months, feeding her curated stories of abuse, neglect, and victimhood. Now, with her performance in full swing, she unleashed the neighbor on John. The phone call was filled with venom. The neighbor, now a fully activated flying monkey, accused John of violating privacy, of spying on his own family, and of being manipulative and dangerous. John responded calmly. "Don't think for a second," he said, "that you found my only method of protecting myself." His attorney quickly reassured him that the recordings were lawful. All cameras were in shared, common areas of the home, spaces where there was no legal expectation of privacy. No bedrooms, no bathrooms, no hidden mics, nothing illegal. But legalities mattered little to Angela. Control, perception, and dominance were her currency. Within days, all the equipment disappeared. The cameras, the monitor, the recorder, gone without a trace. John had no idea if Angela had destroyed them, handed them over to her attorney, or simply thrown them away in a fit of rage. But the equipment, valued at several $100s, had been purchased with his money, installed on his property, and removed without his consent. Then, in the aftermath of 9/11, a time of national trauma and collective introspection, John attempted something few would have. He reached out to Angela. In a moment of sincerity, he asked that the equipment could be returned, not for his own use, but so that he could donate it to their church for security purposes. The same church where John had regularly volunteered as a perimeter guard during children's religious education nights. Weeks later, Angela responded with a cold, calculated blow. "Oh, that equipment?" she said breezily. "I already donated it to the church. Gave it to the pastor myself." It was a lie. A final twist of the knife. At that point in time, the divorce was already underway, and under the law, all marital property was to be considered equally owned and under legal hold until formal division. What Angela had done was theft, plain and simple. Calling it out would only give her more ammunition to use in court. So, John let it go, once again swallowing the insult for the sake of peace. Angela's actions were a mirror reflection of textbook narcissistic abuse, gaslighting and reframing. John's attempt to protect himself was twisted into an act of violation. She flipped the narrative, painting herself as a victim of surveillance, even though she had been the aggressor. Triangulation. By dragging a neighbor into conflict, she ensured her version of events was validated by an external voice, amplifying her control. Violation of boundaries. Angela had no legal right to touch, let alone donate the equipment. But her narcissistic entitlement made her feel justified. Moral laws didn't apply to her. Weaponized virtue. Claiming to donate the equipment to a church added an air of piety to the theft, shielding her behavior behind religious goodwill. Control through chaos. By removing John's only means of defense, she restored the imbalance of power, resetting the game in her favor. In narcissistic warfare, facts don't matter. Only the story does. The illusion must be maintained at all costs. This wasn't just a battle for space in a home. It was a battle for space in the truth. And Angela wanted the entire narrative all to herself. Throughout their marriage, Angela repeatedly siphoned marital assets into a string of short-lived, ill-managed startup ventures, most of which collapsed before they could turn profit. Each new endeavor came with lofty ambitions and an emotional pitch, but they all bore the same end: financial loss, minimal accountability, and emotional fallout. Yet the final venture, oddly enough, found success just in time for her to file for divorce. That last business, conceived in a guise of financial independence, was markedly different. This time, Angela did not go it alone. She enlisted John's full labor and managerial support, whether motivated by a final attempt to save their relationship or by coercion from the constant threat of separation, which Angela wielded like a guillotine in times of disagreement. John complied. He invested his professional skill, personal time, and emotional energy, believing, perhaps naively, that shared work might lead to renewed partnership. Despite Angela holding a respectable, well-paying job at the time, she contributed little to household expenses. Groceries, utilities, medical care for the children, mortgage payments, school supplies, all that fell on John's shoulders. Angela's finances were off-limits, guarded and redirected. She lived by an unspoken but rigid economic philosophy common to narcissistic financial abusers. What's mine is mine, and what's yours is also mine. John's personal finances were drained under the weight of one-sided responsibility. The imbalance didn't just create financial instability. It built emotional resentment and deepened the power gap in the marriage. John wasn't seen as a partner. He was a utility, an ATM, a backstop. And the deeper he dug into his reserves, emotional and financial, the further Angela climbed into independence, positioning herself for an eventual exit. Without warning or disclosure, Angela vacated the marital home. But she didn't leave in haste or confusion. This was a move planned with surgical precision. Unbeknownst to John, she had secretly acquired a new property in another part of town, using funds quietly hoarded throughout their marriage. She signed contracts, packed discreetly, and organized a transition with exacting control, all while John remained entirely unaware. When she left, she did not do so empty-handed. What followed was nothing short of an emotional heist. Angela gutted the home of nearly every shared asset and memory: furniture, linens, photo albums, jewelry, children's keepsakes, family videos, appliances, and Decoraven heirlooms from John's side of the family that had sentimental significance to their children. What she left behind were items she deemed useless: John's premarital bedroom set, outdated kitchenware, a worn dining table. She didn't just move out, she erased their history. John returned home to a hollow shell, stunned by the strategic and comprehensive nature of her extraction. It was as if the family's entire existence had been scrubbed clean. There was no conversation, no explanation, no empathy, just empty rooms and silence. Forced to rebuild, John replaced basic household items piecemeal. He had no choice but to construct new beds for the children by hand, fashioned at his brother's plastics and fabrication shop, because the furniture they had once slept in was gone. What Angela orchestrated wasn't just a logistical coup, it was psychological warfare. Angela's actions were more than personal betrayal. They fit the profile of calculated narcissistic exploitation, and the psychological message was chillingly clear. You don't matter. This is mine. You never existed. Let's dissect the deeper elements at play. Entitlement and ownership distortion. Angela didn't distinguish between shared and individual property. To her, anything within reach was hers, regardless of legal ownership, ethical implications, or emotional value. Narrative control. By stripping the home of shared history, Angela rewrote the story. In her new home, she could portray herself as the sole provider, the victim who rebuilt from the ashes, leaving out the part where she lit the match. Flying monkeys in motion, there's little doubt Angela had help with the physical relocation. Whether friends, family members, or third-party movers, anyone assisting was likely deceived or manipulated into believing she was escaping harm, not enacting it. Disruption of emotional anchors, family photos, heirlooms, children's artwork, all removed not just for possession, but to disrupt memory continuity for John and the children. This is a known alienation tactic. Erase the past, control the present. Financial abuse, theft of property, and emotional sabotage were all framed under a cloak of independence and empowerment. But the reality was darker. This wasn't about thriving. It was about punishing. In the wake of her departure, John was left not just with legal battles and bills, but with a psychological fog, one that only cleared as he came to recognize the patterns of narcissistic behavior. Angela didn't simply walk away from a marriage. She walked away with a narrative, the belongings, and the advantage, leaving John with the task of rebuilding not only a home, but a sense of stability for himself and the children. And still, he carried on, because while narcissists may control the spotlight, they never understand the strength it takes to stand in the shadows and rebuild piece by piece. This chapter is a testament to that strength.